Hello, it's Tom, and today I am going to demonstrate a field dressing and a field tourniquet, a method that predates the common use of cat tourniquets or combat something or other tourniquets that are popularized today. When I was in the Coast Guard and training to treat certain injuries, those were not a part of our kit. And you had to learn how to do it the old fashioned way. Um, so, our analog is a piece of PVC pipe, and that represents our wound. It's just colored in Sharpie. I have 2 rolls of gauze individually wrapped. You can buy these for a fairly reasonable price at a CVS in a box that holds 5 or 7 or 10. I've got 3x4 gauze pads. You could buy bulk packs of those for reasonable prices. You'll notice I don't have any tape. I've got rolls of gauze. I got a triangle bandage. You'll probably have to special order that for the tourniquet, but you don't need to. You can use t-shirt, really. I've got a Sharpie marker. I've got a knife that I can operate with one hand. It's a utility knife. It's a Milwaukee Fastback for cheap, affordable, built sturdy, good quality, and decent safety. And no frills. That's a decent one to put your money in. And this screwdriver, but you can replace that with a sturdy pen or any solid, rigid object. We will explain why you need a solid, rigid object when we get to the tourniquet. But first, field dressing. Now, ideally, you want to apply direct pressure and elevation to your wound to try to stop the bleeding. So you unwrap your sterile gauze, you plant it firmly on there with your hand, you grip, and you elevate the injured area if it's like an arm or a leg. If it's a torso, obviously that's not really something you can do. If you get your buddy to hold that in place while you start the gauze wrapping process. Now, if you're doing this one-handed, I'm sorry, you're doing this by yourself to help someone, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to work on this the hard way. And instead of applying that yourself, you'll try to get the victim to hold it if they're conscious. If they're not, it's going to have to wait. You take your gauze, instead of like unrolling it at once, you wrap it tightly above the affected area until it'll stop spinning on you, at least until you're at a reasonable point. You slap that over, and then you have to start manipulating your wrapped gauze around. You may lose control of it a bit, and the PVC is slippery, giving this an extra challenge to me, but that's okay, because the real world, this isn't easy, especially when you're panicking and your hands are shaking, and the people who are supposed to be saving you are unavailable, we'll say. But you get that wrapped around tight, you keep going, you'll go down below the wound, you go back up above the wound, and you keep going. You want to go at least 2 inches above and 2 inches below the wound. Get a good overlap. What happens, however, if you start bleeding through already? Well, you can slap it would have already happened, but you already have your second layer of gauze that you could slap, and you just keep wrapping your bandage over it. Don't worry about this rolled gauze getting too dirty during this process, because you've got the clean, sterile gauze directly over the wound. And now we're trying to apply pressure, so you can apply your second bandage over that. However, if that isn't going to get it, and once you've done that, it's still bleeding through, You take your second roll of gauze and you slap that right there. And now you're making a compress where you are creating a pressure point with the second roll of gauze directly over the wound. It will soak up, the blood, while at the same time adding increased pressure over the wound. Now, how do you fasten this without any tape? Simple. That last wrap, I'm going to keep my fingers there. I'm going to pull it tight like that. And now when they get to the hospital, they're probably just going to cut it away. So you don't have to leave this tail for them to pull. You can just pull it through. And you can do it a second time. But if you want to leave that tail for whatever reason, if you think you got to get to it quickly, do that. But otherwise, give yourself a second wrap. Now you've tied it directly over your compress, directly over the wound, creating a hell of a lot of direct pressure that you do not need to keep your hand over. Which is good, because now you have a free hand, and you can apply it to a pressure point. What I mean by pressure point, let's say I'm injured here. You can apply pressure there to my arm with a free hand that you wouldn't otherwise have. So if this were my arm, it's elevated, it's elevated, it's got direct pressure on the wound, and the free hand is providing a pressure point into where my blood is directly flowing into the arm. Now, I just went over in one fell swoop elevation, direct pressure, and pressure points to control the bleeding. You want to do all of those ideally in a situation before you go to your last resort. Sometimes you may have to make a judgment call, however, and that's not going to be an option. Triangle bandage. This is the old school multitasker. It unfolds to enormous proportions, but we're not really going to unfold it all the way. We're going to leave it at half of its size. And in this shape, we are just, you'll notice this isn't exactly like the sterile clean thing. It's because it's not meant to be. All the others are. We're going to just quickly roll it. You don't have to be, an artist about it. Our wound is here. We will go, if the body is on this end of the pipe, we will go 2 inches above the wound, because you have to leave an area for the doctors to create a stump. First, we just tie a simple overhand knot. And we remember that screwdriver I mentioned? You can use this or any other rigid object. You tie a second overhand knot, making either a square knot or a granny knot. I prefer the square knot, thank you very much. I was a sailor. And now, you twist. And you keep twisting until you have crushed all of the soft connective tissue and muscle and sinew and blood vessels and blood veins and capillaries and everything to the bone. This is the hard part of triage. So then, you see these wings? I wrap them around so that they will hold my screwdriver or whatever other object I am using in place. And then I will tie another square knot to hold my screwdriver. And that is a tourniquet. That is a field tourniquet. That is the old school way of doing it. If you can't buy 30 Generation 7 cat tourniquets that will work on, say, a classroom of children, it's a lot easier to afford maybe a 10-pack of triangle bandages. You know, and that's kind of, if you're thinking about triaging children, because that's what this is about. Now, the last part of the tourniquet, we're going to pretend this is the victim's forehead. Current time on deck is 18:26, or for you civilian people, it is 6:26 p.m. So you write T for tourniquet on the forehead and the time you applied it, because that will let the doctors know whether or not they have a chance at saving the now tourniqueted limb. It's a low probability that they're going to be able to save it. When you go to a tourniquet, you're basically saying you believe the only way you can save that victim is to sacrifice their limb. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Do not practice that on a human being. You can cause severe damage with just a little bit of pressure. Turning that screwdriver, I think I got 2, maybe 3 full turns on it. That's an enormous amount of pressure. I have literally warped my PVC pipe with a piece of fabric that I twisted around it. Do not practice that on humans. You can get yourself a dummy or a PVC pipe. You saw the way I was struggling with its slippery ass surface, and that makes it a good practice analog if you feel compelled to practice such a thing. I wish there was a happier lesson I had to show you this evening. This is what I've got to work with, though, right now. This is where my mind has been focused. Have a good evening.